It is the voice of Indiana County. It's WCCS 101.1 FM, AM 1160, and WCCSradio.com. Mental Health Awareness Month, and we're trying to get our mentals to work here to figure out a name of a Jimmy Stewart movie here, Dr. Ralph.
It's very difficult to test your memory first thing in the morning, Tom.
Well, for us, it's not first thing. We call this lunchtime.
Well, that's your lunchtime. Yeah, well, I'm retired now, so I get to call this first thing. Well, not first thing, but close to the first thing.
Dr. Ralph May joins us here in Indiana in the morning. Our conversation brought to you by Marcus & Mack, voted best personal injury law firm in the Best of Indiana County contest. Marcus & Mack, a law firm representing injured people. May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and I asked you to come in and visit with us on that topic for these 4 Wednesdays that are left here in this month. And, there's 1,000 different angles that you can approach when you're talking about mental health and ways to deal with it. I want to start this segment, though, today talking about how the people who are not suffering a mental health event can be true helpers to those who are going through an event.
Absolutely. Support, we know from the research and from experience, that support is so critical when you're struggling with a mental health disorder like depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, all of them, PTSD, that when you have someone around you that gets you, that understands what you're going through, that's willing to stand with you, not just try to talk you out of it. I think some well-meaning people sometimes trying to offer support, well, you'll get over it, it's not that big. Well, it's not that easy. It's like, let's get over your diabetes. It doesn't work that way. You have to figure out how to support and be with the person, hear them out, not be afraid for them to talk about what they're experiencing. And that's hard for people. You don't like to hear people suffering. You don't like to hear their stories of pain. But that goes a long way. Everybody that I've worked with through the years, my own personal patients, the people I've supervised, the people I've talked to, basically support is critical. When people understand you, it makes the illness easier to manage.
There was a story I was reading a week or so ago. It was a first-hand account of a guy who had suffered the loss of his wife and was ill himself. And he had someone come visit him who spent the entire time that he was there. And, people were trying to be helpful.
Right.
And this person was talking and encouraging and doing whatever he could to buck up his spirits.
Right.
And he said when he left, he felt worse.
Right.
But someone else came to visit him, and he said, sat there for an hour and a half. Not a word was passed between the two of us. When that guy had to leave, he said, I felt so much better. It's really case by case, and it's really trying to figure out what is the best approach here that's going to help this person the most.
Listen. The story you just told is a perfect encapsulation of what people need to do. As human beings, we want to help. We want to say things to people to make them feel better, right? You'll get over it. It could be a lot worse. All these things that when you're really struggling kind of ring hollow. They really do. They send a message that you're really not getting what I'm going through. So the individual just sits and listens. If you think of what therapists do, good therapists listen. They listen carefully to what the person is saying, and they reflect sometimes, is that what you meant, or were you saying that? They aren't trying to give them advice or tell them what to do. They're listening to their story, their narrative, so they understand what the person's going through. Just listening to the story is powerful and healing.
Yeah. It's a process, isn't it?
It very much is. There's no quick, easy fix here in our society which wants quick, easy fixes. This requires relationship and time.
Let's talk about the concept of understanding, because you talked about somebody who gets it and somebody who understands what you're going through. That is not an easy thing to grasp.
No.
If we haven't been through something similar to that in our own cases, it's going to be awful difficult for us to understand what somebody is going through. And so that's where that hollowness that you were talking about comes in.
Well, I think, we sometimes are afraid to face that our brains are organs of our body, right? That things can happen to our brains like any other organ of the body, and that causes changes in our mood and changes in our behavior and changes in our thinking. And that's what mental health disorders are. When something gets stuck, depression, anxiety, PTSD, bipolar disorder. So what we need to do is educate ourselves a little bit about what the person is experiencing from just an educational perspective, from what is bipolar disorder, what is depression, how is it different than grief, what is grief versus depression, what is PTSD really. we're much better at getting information about mental health out than we used to be. I mean, when I started in 1977, it was like, we don't talk about this, right?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, 50 years ago, we don't talk about this. So we've come a long way, but just because we talk about it doesn't mean we really are understanding what people are experiencing when they have these disorders. Mm-hmm. People don't really understand the labels very well. So when I'm working with families, my first order of business is to help them get educated about the disorder, about what this disorder kind of encapsulates. Everyone is different, by the way. You can have two people with depression. One person can appear one way, one another. So you can't just say it's the same for everyone, because it's not. That's why you have to take time and get to talk to the person, right? Even clinicians like myself, somebody comes in, I don't think I've ever seen two depressed people, and I've seen a lot through my career, that are the same.
Yeah.
If you don't talk to them, if you don't let them talk to you, you don't learn that.
When you started way back in
77.
I was going to say 27.
Yeah, 12, okay.
When you started many years ago, were group sessions all that common?
No. When we started, there were some. Group therapy was starting to develop. It was mostly individual therapy. I mean, most of the models of treatment then were what we called psychodynamic or Freudian. The behavioral and cognitive models were starting to become more prevalent. Group therapy was being developed, particularly for substance use recovery. Mm-hmm. Group therapy was taking off there and always has been a major player. But we used groups a lot in my career. I ran a medical support group for years. People had depression and chronic medical illnesses like chronic pain, heart disease. Because when you have both, you know, that's a very steep hill to climb, you know. And so the group support, having people in that group that know your journey, know kind of the lay of the land, that goes a long way. It can be as powerful as the therapist in helping people recover.
There is obviously quite a difference when you're dealing with someone who is struggling with mental problems and they're an adult as opposed to a child.
Right.
A kid is not developed anyway.
No.
Even the most adjusted kid has not, his brain physically or her brain has not physically developed to the point where it's able to handle emotionally everything that comes at a kid.
Right.
So dealing with their problems and their issues has to be approached differently, does it not?
Kids are not little adults. Their brains are different, as you pointed out. The development of the frontal cortex, which we call the brakes of the brain, the ability to think before you speak kind of thing, that's the last part of the human brain to develop, so it develops more slowly. So kids are more impulsive in general. They tend to be more emotional, more activated. I used to laugh. I had a group of adolescents I talked to, and I said, you know, guys, adolescence sometimes is considered a mental illness. You know, I was joking because your brains are developing. You know, you're in a state of emotional upheaval. I can still remember my adolescence. I wasn't a calm, focused guy, you know, and we all go through periods of time in our development. And so when you're working with adolescents, by the way, adolescents can get depression. Adolescents can have anxiety disorders. The suicide rate in adolescents is still pretty high. And so we have to pay attention to their particular needs, but they're not young adults. Even when you're talking about medications, the medications work a little differently for children and and adolescents. So it takes a little, the therapist I had that worked best with adolescents, they have this kind of genuineness to them. You know, they just have a kind of, tell me your story. I'm not going to get too upset about it. I'm not going to get, you know, whacked out about it. Just talk about what you're going through, develop a relationship. That works. And adolescent groups also work very well then too, but they're very different than adults.
We're talking with Dr. Ralph May this morning about mental problems. It is Mental Health Awareness Month. When we are dealing with a kid as well, we tend to, I shouldn't say it that way. Let's change the way that I was about to say that. We could have the tendency to tell them just roll with the punches,
right?
Because you know life is going to come at you hard, and you're going to have to learn to deal with this someday anyway. But when we do that, it really is a form of piling on, isn't it?
It is. It's piling on. I mean, there's truth that we develop by challenges. Our personalities develop when we face challenges and master them, and that's part of growth and development throughout our lifespan. But when you just kind of say, you know, suck it up, get over it, you know, you'll be all right, what you're doing is minimizing the person's emotional experience. You're minimizing their report to you. So what you're doing is you're damaging relationship. Ultimately, what you're doing is you're saying, adults, people, they don't really care. They don't really care how I'm feeling. They don't care. And that creates kind of a pattern in your life where you just don't trust people. You think, well, I'm on my own. I can't trust anybody. And that doesn't go well.
I thought about that when you were saying that because it does establish a pattern
right?
That somebody can carry with them for the rest of their lives, really.
Yeah, people don't get it. So why do I talk? Why do I trust anybody? Why do I say anything? And then you become more isolated. And that isolation, Todd, when you pull back from connection, that's one of the greatest risk factors for mental illness we have is loneliness and isolation.
Yeah. Dealing with a child and dealing with an adult, as we said, are very, very different. When someone has brought forth, the term is baggage, when they have brought that baggage with them from their youth into their adulthood, that sort of mindset is going to affect them in their job performance,
Right.
In their relationships within their own families. It can be really, really damaging. Is there a way for them to recover and get back to a point where that is not as much a part of their psyche?
Absolutely. If you think, I mean, you just kind of summarized my entire therapy career, because in working with people, the people I mostly worked with were people that went through some really difficult things in their childhood, not just, emotional rejection, but abuse, neglect. And so the trust, the connection, the greatest challenge wasn't that therapy would be helpful. It is. The greatest challenge is getting over the hump to believe it would be helpful, to believe that I would care enough to listen to their story, that I would care enough to want to help them reconstruct their lives and sort out the good from the bad. And by sorting that out, you do get stronger. You do put things in perspective, because we carry things like inside of ourselves that are distortions. They're based on our own reactions to the events. And we think it's us. We're bad. We're the wrong ones. We're the broken ones, right? It wasn't what happened to us. It's us. And that's the hurdle you have to get over.
Is there an element of, I've buried that and I prefer not to bring that back up, that's in that as well?
Well, it's no fun to go back and remember difficult things. It's a painful experience. But when you go back and do that as an adult in a supportive environment, you can sort out the things that you've been carrying around that have been affecting you even though you don't know it. There's a lot of this stuff we carry inside ourselves. We don't even know it. And it leaks out in relationship. It affects our connections in very subtle and sometimes damaging ways. So there's a reason to clean out that closet so it no longer can haunt you.
You and I have talked in the past about this. There is also a very strong connection between the mental health problems that you might be having and your physical health.
Absolutely.
And getting into sort of an exercise or physical activity type of an approach, especially when you have somebody who wants to be a helper and a teammate with you. To me, seems like that would be a really, really strong way to approach things.
The term we throw around is self-care, which is doing things that improves your physical well-being and your emotional well-being. So some things you can do that are non-physical is like listen to music, meditate, learn meditation, deep breathing. But exercise is a good thing. And I'm not talking about running a marathon. You don't have to go out and run the Pittsburgh Marathon. Maybe you want to. Maybe you want to set that as a goal and do that. But, walking, I've said a million times, getting outside and getting exposed to natural sunlight, even when it's cloudy, that goes a long way toward helping your mood and resetting things in your brain.
Talking with Dr. Ralph May. These segments are going to go so quickly.
They do. They do. There's so much to cover
in this month. That's why I've asked you to come back and visit with us on the 4 remaining Wednesdays of this month, because there's a lot of ground to cover.
A lot, and I'll be here to do it.
Yeah. For folks who need a resource.
Our local resource, there's 2 resources. You can always dial or text 988, which is the National Crisis Line, but locally, 877-333-2470. That's our local crisis number, 24/7. Mobile crisis is attached to that, which means somebody can come out and see you. It is a great resource.
He is Dr. Ralph May. Thanks for the visit.
Thank you, Todd.
It is the voice of Indiana County. It's WCCS 101.1 FM, AM 1160, WCCSradio.com. May is Mental Health Awareness Month. Time for a checkup. It's 8:26 in the morning. It's Indiana in the Morning. Boomer Sports next, and then Jake is with us from the WCCS Newsroom.